So we're wrapping up this series in the book of Daniel looking at the collision of these two worlds. And we feel it, don't we, that pressure upon us, this constant attack on foundations, the huge pressure we face as we seek to live our lives as followers of Jesus. I was meeting with a friend earlier this week who said, it's harder to be a casual Christian now. He's right, isn't he? You know, and while we both agree that's a good thing in many ways, it doesn't make it an easy thing. This past week, I heard that one of the songwriters and worship leaders for Hillsong, Marty Simpson, said he's losing his Christian faith. He said, time for some real talk. I'm genuinely losing my faith and it doesn't bother me. Like what bothers me now is nothing. I'm so happy now, so at peace with the world. It's crazy. I wonder, what happened to him that he could write these things? But this actually isn't so much about him. I think it's about all of us. See, Marty just goes on to raise a whole bunch of questions. And I think the questions are good. Even the doubts he expresses are fine. After all, God is never afraid of questions or fazed by our doubts. And I think a healthy church needs to always be a space where people can raise questions and express their doubts. And I think that's what we do here. After all, we feel this constant pressure, don't we, from this world all around us, this collision of these two worlds that kind of squeezes us at times. And that's happening more and more and more around us and our children and our teenagers. And I think it's going to happen more and more. So what rattles your faith? What is it that unsettles you? And are you prepared for an escalation of that pressure, if that's what happens? On top of that, I see a lot of people who just don't have a clear purpose about why they wake up in the morning, which is really hard because without an overarching purpose, it can just feel like you just go through these routine, mundane aspects of life. It's like that old movie Groundhog Day, when a person wakes up every day to the same old routine, the same old rhythms of life, and it's just boring. And if we don't have like this big purpose, we don't see this big picture of what we're part of what Jesus is doing in our world to make all things new, suddenly, that's where we are. But if we can capture a purpose, our work and our conversations and even our chores all take on a whole new significance because we get to walk with Jesus day in, day out, hour in, hour out. So over the last few weeks, we've been looking at the narrative parts of the book of Daniel. Last week, I gave you this chart here as a bit of a summary of the book of Daniel. And as we saw, those first few chapters are all these narrative, these stories from the book of Daniel, from his life and his mate's life, reminding us that God is in charge of the past. And that inspires us to know that God's in charge of our present and our future. But then Daniel looks at these prophecies to help us even see that God is actually in charge of the future. We don't need to be afraid of this collision, this pressure in these two worlds, because God's in charge, past, present, or future. So today, as we come to Daniel chapter 7, we come to that prophetical part of the book of Daniel. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but when some people begin to talk about prophecy, they kind of get like all weird and dogmatic, and they speculate on things that the Bible never, ever actually talks about. But they say it loudly enough and confidently enough to, people kind of go with it. So, in fact, here's a photo that a friend of mine took in New York back in 2015. Apparently, the end of the world was meant to come, 7th of October in 2015, but I don't think it happened because, we're still here, right? Just before that, a few years before that, here's another photo, this one taken at the intersection in Balmoral, announcing Judgment Day on the 21st of May, 2011. But from what I remember, I'm trying to remember what happened on that day, but I'm pretty sure it's about the same as happened the 20th and the 22nd of May. And so when nothing happened, the response to this, the guy's name was Harold Camping, he announced a new rapture date on October the 21st, 2011. But nothing noteworthy happened on that day either. And a lot of people got fired up around the Mayan calendar. Anybody remember that? How the end of the world was meant to come on 21st of December 2012. But again, nothing happened. Or you go back a few more years, and some of you weren't born around this time, but I was around at the turn of the millennium, Y2K. Anybody remember that? Everything was about Y2K, and we started to stockpile things, because when the clock was going to hit midnight, the world was going to go crazy, and all of our computers would be shut down, economies were going to collapse, everything would finish as we knew it. So people were purchasing anything they could, stockpiling toilet paper and all these things around them just in case we couldn't, shop anymore. And then pastors were putting prophecy charts out to try to convince us of all these things that were about to happen. But 1st of January 2000 came and went, really without any incident. Do you see a common theme happening through some of these things? There's people that speculate dates and all these other things that the Bible never talks about. And it just gets weird. And Christians look weird and foolish. I think it's those stories that should remind us we're not meant to do things like that when it comes to prophecy. But at the same time, the Bible does talk about the future. It doesn't give us a date, but it wants us to have this big picture clearly in our minds so that we know what lies ahead. And I think the reason God does this is he wants us to capture a bigger purpose in the here and now and be prepared for the pressure that might be upon us as we feel this collision of these two worlds. So in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel shares a vision of the future. This is what he says. In my vision that night, I, Daniel, saw a great storm churning the surface of a great sea with strong winds blowing from every direction. Now, ancient Israelites understood the sea as a dangerous place. It was a symbol for chaos and uncontrollable evil. That's why at the very beginning of creation, when God is bringing order out of chaos, it comes out of the deep, out of the sea, as it were. It's no surprise to see 4 enormous beasts now arising, one after another, out of this raging sea. The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings. As I watched, its wings were pulled off, and it was left standing with its 2 hind feet on the ground like a human being. It was given a human mind. Then I saw a second beast, and it looked like a bear. It was rearing up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in his mouth between his teeth, and I heard a voice saying to it, "Get up, devour the flesh of many people." Then the third of these strange beasts appeared, and it looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. Great authority was given to this beast. Then in my vision that night, I saw a 4th beast, terrifying, dreadful, and very strong. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth and trampled their remains beneath its feet. It was different from any of the other beasts, and it had 10 horns. I mean, what in the world is going on here? Is Daniel talking about, some new alien species kind of coming to our world and everything kind of changing? The style of writing, it can be a bit weird, can't it? And these images, these metaphors are describing something. But we don't have to speculate about what or who these beasts are because Daniel goes on. These 4 huge beasts represent 4, say it, kingdoms that will arise from the earth. So these 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms led by a succession of evil leaders. Now, do you notice that these kingdoms are pictured not just as powerful animals, but as mutants? They're perversions of what God intended in his creation. Really perversions of what God intended in the way people are meant to lead. So this vision is kind of paired up with Daniel chapter 2. Last week, if you're around, I explained that the ancient way of writing, the way the Hebrews would put things together, was often through what was called a chiasm. Here's a picture of it up here. This is in Daniel chapter 2 to 7. So last week we saw how chapters 4 and 5, right in the middle there, kind of pair up together, have a very similar theme. In the same way that Daniel chapter 3 and 6 have a very similar theme. Now we're talking about Daniel 7, and with that in mind, knowing it kind of pairs up with Daniel 2. Very similar stories to each other, and so the ancient readers of the story would just naturally bring these together to compare and contrast them. So let's kind of do this here. Put up the contrast in this next graph here. So in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel has a dream also of 4 different kingdoms, but it's by way of a statue with precious metals conveying those 4 kingdoms. Chapter 7 is ultimately about these 4 mutant beasts. So what's the difference? I think the difference is kind of in perspective. From a human perspective, like Daniel chapter 2, as Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, this is about how people often see these kingdoms. Powerful, impressive, pretty cool to look at. Chapter 7, I think, is very much about how God tends to look at these kingdoms. Vicious, mutant-like, ugly, mean. Isn't it funny how God can look at something very differently to the way we see it? We can see these leaders and kingdoms as powerful and impressive and inspiring. God sees them for what they often are, these mutant beasts. Very different perspective of these same kingdoms. So what's that first creature? Well, the first creature in chapter 2, whether we're talking about Daniel chapter 2 or Daniel chapter 7, is Babylon. And we know that because Daniel interprets it, and he talks about this being Nebuchadnezzar and representative of the Babylonian Empire. That Jeremiah, another of the prophets at the time, spoke about Babylon as a lion and an eagle, so the image is quite appropriate. And then you come to the second creature. Now, some scholars say this is Medes, the second creature, and Persia, the third creature, but I think this is just a co-joint empire of the Medo-Persian Empire, because the Medes never at all ruled over the whole Near East like other empires. And whenever we interpret Scripture, we're meant to interpret it through the way the writers understood the world of that time. And they understood the Medo-Persian Empire being this joint empire, and you get that in Daniel chapter 6. When Daniel talks about the Medes and the Persians as one unit, he repeats it even 3 times. If you're around a few weeks ago, I spoke about Daniel 5. Remember the writing on the wall? When Daniel interprets that word Perez, and he says, Belshazzar, your kingdom is going this night and is divided between the Medo-Persian Empire who's coming. This is the way they understood the world. In fact, even in the next chapter, Daniel has another dream, and it says, what you have seen pertains to the very end of time. The 2-horned ram represents the kings of Media and Persia. Here it is in this same animal. Then he talks about a shaggy male goat representing the kings of Greece, and goes on to talk about, again, these other kingdoms that we're coming to. So, second creature, the Medo-Persians, and then you come into the third creature, the leopard, which is Greece. The leopard is the 3rd fastest animal in the world, I'm told. I think 58 k's per hour it can run. Image here is, leopard with 4 birds' wings on its back. In other words, this kingdom comes really fast. Certainly appropriate to describe like Alexander the Great and the way he just came through and invaded the Medo-Persian kingdom in 334 BC. And within 10 short years, and by the time he was just 32 years of age, he had developed this entire empire right to the borders of India. And when he died at 33, his kingdom was split into 4 parts. I guess that's where the 4 heads of the leopard fit in. And then the fourth creature, we can be told, is Rome and all that comes after Rome and this worldwide empire that Daniel will go on to talk about. But the issue here actually isn't so much about the details. The point is that God knows the future, and God isn't taken by surprise in any of this. He's not threatened by whoever the leader is or whatever that power or appeal they might have by other people. No, the point of this chapter is that successive evil leaders will make life difficult for the followers of Christ. Their kingdoms might look powerful and impressive, but these leaders will oppose God in all that his followers stand for. Now, the spotlight for Daniel now turns on this fourth creature. And there's something even about this fourth creature in particular that captures Daniel's attention because this beast is so horrid and terrifying. I mean, look at the words here: terrifying, dreadful, and very strong, with 10 horns. Now, I think horns are meant to be this, attacking weapon of any animal. So an animal with 10 horns obviously is like, the animal, powerful beast. So this beast means business. The idea is this last empire will have incredible power and will overtake the world. And Daniel looks at this beast and he starts to get distracted by one of the 10 horns. Because this horn is like this conspicuous horn. Listen to what he says. As I was looking at the horns, suddenly another small horn appeared among them. 3 of the first horns were torn out by the roots to make room for it. This little horn had eyes like human eyes and a mouth that was boasting arrogantly. And this puzzles Daniel, understandably. I mean, he knew that horn meant power, but he's still perplexed about the whole thing. So he asked this angelic interpreter what the meaning of the horn is. He says, I also asked about the 10 horns of the fourth beast's head and the little horn that came up afterward. As I watched, this horn was waging war against God's holy people and was defeating them. And then the angel said to me, this fourth beast is the fourth world power that will rule the earth. It will be different from all the others. It will devour the whole earth, trampling and crushing everything in its path. Its 10 horns are 10 kings who will rule that empire. Then another king will arise, different from the other 10, who will subdue 3 of them. He will defy the Most High and oppress the holy people of the Most High. In other words, this is an evil kingdom led by this evil leader opposed to God and to the people of God. The New Testament refers to him as the Antichrist. And really, the name kind of symbolizes everything that he stands for. He's anti-Jesus. That John in the New Testament says that there's been a whole succession of these anti-Christ, anti-Jesus leaders who make life difficult for the followers of Christ. He says, dear children, the last hour is here. You've heard that the Antichrist is coming, and already many such antichrists have appeared. For this we know that the last hour has come. And you come to the very last book of the Bible in Revelation, and in chapter 13, it talks a lot about this person, and it pictures him again as a beast that exhibits the same hostility to God and to the people of God. It says, I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. Sounds a lot like Daniel. He spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and his dwelling. And the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the people who belong to this world worshipped the beast. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. Now, none of this is written so that we sit back and we start to speculate on who these leaders are and what presidents they might be and what leaders in our world they might be. There's none of that. Rather, what Daniel's saying, don't be surprised if you see evil leaders out there making life difficult for you. Don't be caught by surprise if there's more pressure you feel, if there's this increase in temptation and troubles for people who love and follow Jesus in this world. I mean, it's exactly what a whole bunch of us are feeling right now, isn't it? So what do? I mean, what is it that gets us through this collision between these two worlds? Well, Daniel goes on to ensure that we know the rest of the story. And his big idea really is while successive evil leaders will make life difficult for the followers of Jesus, know that God wins. God wins. Now, we all like to be part of a winning team, don't you? Don't we? How many of you watched the game last night? We all like to be part of a winning team, unless, of course, you're Australian, like a few of you here. But those of us that like the All Blacks winning, we like to be part of a winning team. It's the same in life. And so Daniel steps in, and there's this like sudden change of scene. And it's not something that comes after these events. Rather, Daniel's vision is, it's kind of like a split-screen TV. You know, you have these two images, these two pictures going on at the same time. There's an image in the upper screen. There's another image going on in the lower screen. Now, the picture in the lower screen pictures the fourth beast and this little horn, you know, speaking, boasting arrogantly. At the same time, the upper image starts to come into focus, and it's a picture of the activity in the kingdom of heaven. And the activities of both of these spheres are happening at the same time. It's like Daniel has seen two realities, but they're not completely separate or independent. They're happening at the same time. Just one's happening above or behind, another is happening below. Both of them are real. Both of them are present in his vision. He's already told us about the one below, these mutant beasts and how powerful they are. But that's not all that Daniel sees. And he doesn't want any of us to miss out on the other sphere that's so often out of our sight. Listen to what he says. I watched as thrones were put in place, and the Ancient One sat down to judge. His clothing was as white as snow, his hair like purest wool. He sat on a fiery throne with wheels of blazing fire, and a river of fire was pouring out, flowing from his presence. Millions of angels ministered to him. Many millions stood to attend him. The court began in session, and the books were opened. And I continued to watch because I could hear, lower screen, the little horn's boastful speech. I kept watching until the fourth beast was killed and its body was destroyed by fire. And this is the mention of the Ancient of Days, which talks about God, our Father. Images of fire talking about holiness, just like the people of God originally saw God on Mount Sinai. Picture of books being opened so that everything that anyone has ever done is all laid clear and justice comes. And the fate of this world is not in the hands of these arrogant, powerful leaders, but in the will and the purposes of the God of heaven. And did you notice the way Daniel describes the end of this most terrifying beast? It's no big fanfare. What does he say? I kept watching until the fourth beast was killed and his body was destroyed by fire. It's just like matter of fact. Yeah, died. That's what happened. No drama. God has this, is the idea. Daniel continues. As my vision continued that night, I saw someone like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient One and was led into his presence. He was given authority and honor and sovereignty over all the nations of the world, so that people of every race and nation and language would obey him. His rule is eternal. It will never end. His kingdom will never be destroyed. So who is this Son of Man? Well, the Son of Man was the favorite expression Jesus used for himself. He used it just like 30 times in the Gospel of Matthew alone. One of the hardest titles for the people to grasp at the time, but it showed the clearest relationship Jesus had with the Ancient of Days, with his Father. In fact, Jesus used it of himself when he was on trial by the high priest. When the high priest said, who are you? Jesus replied, well, you've said it. And in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand, coming on the clouds of heaven. And Caiaphas, the high priest of the time, understood exactly what Jesus was claiming about himself as the Son of God, because his response was to tear his robes and say Jesus had committed blasphemy. See, what I want you to see is the big idea of this chapter is while successive evil leaders will make life difficult for followers of Christ, God wins. He really wins. I think all of this should change the way we see what's happening around us. I mean, collisions are occurring. We feel that. This pressure, constant pressure, is always around us. But what is it that keeps our feet on the ground? What is it that helps us live well in the present? I've jotted down a couple of things here. For one, expect the journey to be hard. but realize it's worth it. Yes, it's much harder now to be a casual Christian. Now you actually have to make a choice of where you stake your purpose in life. I think that's a good thing. And yes, we're all beginning to feel this pressure as this kingdom that we're part of isolates the children of God and denigrates the children of God. And I think we should expect the journey to be hard and possibly get harder, but I tell you, it is worth it. It is worth it. Yes, there's dividing lines now between the ways we're meant to live and the way people that don't know Jesus live. And those differences should be seen in the way we spend money, the way we date, the way we relate to each other, the way we uphold marriage, the way we treat people at school, the way we treat people in our workplaces, the way we parent, the way we uphold dignity of life for all people, whether they're just a few weeks old in an embryo or whether they're really, 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 really old people. We are all made in the image of God, and life has dignity. And we uphold all of these things regardless of the pressure we face. The world around us might make us feel inferior or small-minded or backward or dumb, but actually that's to be expected. And it's exactly why Daniel is sharing this vision with us, because he wants every single one of us to be prepared for the pressure, to realize sometimes it's going to be hard and tough, but stay true, Daniel says. Even when this empire around us tries to reclaim you, rename you, or re-educate you, stay true. He's already told you about the pressure he and his mates in Babylon faced. And I think he's inspired us, hasn't he? With his example of, even with all this pressure, he still stayed true along with his friends, knowing that God will stand with him in the furnace or in the lion's den. And he wants us to realize as we face pressure, we can stand because God will be with us. Just like we have been singing in these last few weeks, God will be with us in the fire. There'll be another holding back the waters. Just as he's been faithful in the past, he will be faithful in the present and in the future. We can trust him. Any challenge we face, our future is always in his hands. Didn't Jesus say, in this world you will have troubles, but be brave, for I have overcome the world. And how did Jesus overcome? Well, he took our original destiny that included suffering and persecution and violence, and he exchanges it so that we share in his destiny, glorious vindication, everlasting reign on this earth. Church, he has overcome. This is what Daniel is trying to tell us. Yes, the journey will be hard at times, but what gets us through the hard stuff is this belief that God will one day win. We are on the winning team, which leads to this final point here. Continue to celebrate that God will win. Focus your attention on the upper image, not just the lower image of life where we live. That lower image is what we naturally see around us. But there is more. There is so much more going on behind the scenes. I love the way the angelic interpreter focuses on this big idea for Daniel. It sums it up. Angel says, these 4 huge beasts represent 4 kingdoms that will arise from the earth. But in the end, the holy people of the Most High will be given the kingdom, and they will rule forever and ever. What a delicious summary. God wins. God wins. Endurance is possible for us because the best is yet to come. Yes, successive evil leaders will make life difficult for followers of Jesus, but God wins. So let me ask you, how are you going in the battle? As you feel that this pressure at a whole lot of different levels, where is it that you need to know right now that God will win? Because that is vital as you live in this below screen, to know what's happening in that above screen? Where do you need to know that God is one? See, right now you might be looking death square in the eye. It's past Thursday. Pastor John Kirkpatrick passed away. You know, he lost his battle with cancer. But make no mistake about it, God still wins. I mean, right now, Pastor John is dancing around with joy, cancer-free, celebrating the increasing reign of Jesus in our world. So think about it as a split screen. On the lower screen, there's cancer and there's these difficulties and there's a whole bunch of things. But on the upper screen is this victory Jesus has over death. That even when health collides with death, God still has the victory. Or you might be looking at a relationship challenge and you're tempted to deal with it like everyone else around you. Revenge, avoidance, slander, life in the lower screen. But as a follower of Jesus, one who has a citizenship of heaven, you live your life with the values of the upper screen world. And so you make choices about speaking the truth in love, to forgive, to show wisdom and courage and restraint. And so you make the hard choice of not seeking revenge because you see the bigger picture that Jesus will bring justice to all things. Or you might be facing the pressure around lifestyle decisions. So much easier to go with the crowd, to agree with the majority. But we're not going to do that because we see again the bigger picture. We see what Jesus is doing in this world. And as I've said before, it's never our situation that determines our courage. It's how we see the situation that determines our courage. If we just see the pressure around us, if we just base our joy on circumstances, we will always succumb to failure. But if we can see the big picture that God is in charge, that God will win, we can deal with anything and be courageous as a result. Not your situation that determines your courage, it's how you see your situation that determines your courage. So we choose to live out the values of the kingdom. We choose to talk about Jesus to others. We challenge unjust and damaging practices. We rebuild what's broken in our city. This is our mandate as we renew people and places. I mean, church, we will face pressure, we will face challenges, but never, ever lose sight of the bigger picture. Because it's that bigger picture that will always get us through. Don't be afraid, is what God tells us in this repeated commandment. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And why do we need to hear it again and again? Well, at least in my case, I am prone to fear. I am prone to anxiety. Because it does get hard, doesn't it? But Jesus says, don't be afraid. I am with you always. Trust in me. The winner of the battle is with us. And he is victorious. We're on the winning team. So no matter how powerful and arrogant leaders or nations or culture might be, no one is able to stop what Jesus is going to do. Evil may look like it has the upper hand, but one day it will be defeated. The one really in charge is God. There's absolutely no question whatsoever as to who will win. For one day that great war will give way to the great peace, and our leader, Jesus, will make all things new. Amen? Let's pray together. Jesus, together we believe you are alive and you are active in our world. And many in this room are facing moments where the pressure is just intense. And they're surrounded by life in the here and now. And for many, it's all they've been seeing. Spirit of God, would you open their eyes to see the bigger reality? the reality of what you're doing, even in the challenges they're facing. Would you help them to trust in you? Would you help them to draw near to you and to obey you regardless of what that looks like? Jesus, thank you that you are in charge. And so as a community of faith, we look to you, our leader, and we ask that your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.